Aboitiz. We may begin.
Okay. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the fourth installment of the Archaeology webinar series of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology and Traces. The opening lecture is entitled Demographic History and Origins of the Filipino People by Dr. Maximilian Larena. The webinar is jointly hosted by Aido Balboa, Mylene Lising, Dr. Riczar Fuentes, and me. This webinar series is supported by the School of Social Sciences, the Anthropological and Sociological initiatives of the Ateneo, Asia, and the Areté and its Eduardo Aboitiz Sandbox zone. Thank you all for joining us today for another exciting lecture. Now, this semester's webinar series will be opened by an outstanding scientist and a leading expert in human evolution and genetic origins, and a graduate of Ateneo de Davao University, Dr. Maximilian Larena. Dr. Larena obtained a Doctor of Medicine, ranked #1 in the class, at the Davao Medical School Foundation in 2005, and a PhD in medical science at the John Curtin School of Medical Research of the Australian National University in 2013. After a position as postdoctoral researcher and member of the prestigious Jan Holmgren Group of the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at the University of Göteborg, Dr. Larena researches now at the Department of Organismal Biology of the University of Uppsala in Sweden, at his own lab, the Larena Laboratory for Human Evolution, that investigates Asia-Pacific human origins and demographic history. He has widely published in leading scientific journals on the population history and biological adaptation in island Southeast Asia and Oceania, including indigenous populations in the Philippines, of course, which will be in the center of his talk today. It is a privilege and a great pleasure to have Dr. Max Larena in our webinar today. Thank you, and I hand over the microphone to Mylene now to tell us a bit more about our distinguished speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is indeed a tremendous privilege to be able to listen to Dr. Max Larena's talk about his outstanding work this afternoon. This is happening at a momentous point in the timeline of human genomic research, wherein another geneticist in this emerging scientific field has just been awarded yesterday the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for 2022 for discoveries in human evolution. In March 2021, the prestigious refereed journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America, or PNAS, published what has been called a watershed study authored by Dr. Max Larena and Professor Matthias Jacobsson of Uppsala University in Sweden, entitled Multiple Migrations to the Philippines During the Last 50,000 Years. Both the Philippine Health Research Ethics Board and the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples Central Office reacted to this publication by filing complaints to the journal with regard to quote-unquote ethical issues concerning the study. Because of this, the PNAS staff, led by their editorial ethics manager, conducted an extensive investigation into the matter. An independent bioethicist specializing in the region was consulted by the PNAS staff as well. The final decision of the PNAS investigation into the ethical issues being questioned was handed out on the 11th of June 2021 in the favor of the authors, Dr. Larena and Professor Jacobson. In the end, 5 independent bodies from 3 different countries drew the same conclusions, that accusations were without basis and that Dr. Larena's and Professor Jacobson's research was performed in accordance to ethical standards. For the record, as one of the highest rated Scopus journals in the world, the journal PNAS receives an average of 17,000 direct submissions for publication annually, and their known acceptance rate is 14%. Valid concerns or typhoon in a teacup? We are in the tropics. In the open forum layer, let's grab the opportunity to address the elephant in the Zoom room as we get clarification on this issue directly from Dr. Max Larena himself, and to hopefully finally put that issue to rest once and for all. So now I turn you over to our speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Max Larena.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the kind introduction, Alfred and Mylene. And let's start sharing the screen. Can you see the slides? Okay.
Yes.
Again, good morning, everyone. Good morning from Sweden. Good afternoon in the Philippines, I suppose. And this talk will cover the publications as mentioned from last year, mainly from the PNAS, Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, as well as other publications in August last year, Current Biology and in Nature as well. And the title of my talk is Demographic History and Origins of the Filipino People. And for this talk, I will first give a brief background and present to you the current theories on Filipino origins. And then later on, I'll present to you an overview of the various methods that are currently used in trying to dissect the past and the main method that we utilize in this study. And then later on, I'll present to you the different ethnic groups that were covered in the study. And lastly, and then using the genomic data that was generated in the study, we will re-examine the different theories and dissect the origins of the Filipino people and present to you the highlights of the findings of the study. And lastly, I'll present to you a summary. And as Mylene mentioned, it was very relevant for today's talk because yesterday, the Nobel Prize was for Physiology and Medicine was announced, and it was given to Svante Pääbo for his discoveries concerning the genomes of extinct hominins and human evolution. He is an alumni of Uppsala University. He did his undergrad and PhD in Uppsala, and he is one who really established the field in terms of looking at the past. He is the lead author in sequencing the Neanderthal genome as well as the Denisovan genome, which is a very important reference data that we can use to try to uncover if there is Denisovan introgression, Neanderthal introgression into present-day populations. As a brief background, where I am today, Sweden, it's quite larger than Philippines in terms of area, 50% more, 450,000 square kilometers compared to 300,000 square kilometers Philippines. But in terms of population, it's way less. There's only 10 million Swedes and compared to 110 million Filipinos. In terms of linguistic diversity, there's only Swedish as the main language and then 5 other minority languages. But Philippines, it's quite linguistically diverse, more than 110 languages. And depends on the committee or the commission that you will ask. Based on Commission ng Wikang Filipino, there's more than 130 languages, or based on Ethnologue, there's more than 170 languages. But yeah, it's at least 110 languages scattered all throughout more than 7,000 islands. In terms of languages, all Philippine languages, like even the Manobo, any ethnic group, even the Negritos, all languages that are spoken in the Philippines is classified under the Malaya-Polynesian branch of Austronesian. And yes, so it's a primary branch of Malayo-Polynesian, and there are different subgroups of Philippine languages. Almost all are classified under these, except for one, the languages of the Sama-related groups, which includes the commonly known Bajau, which is classified under Barito languages of which is under Bornean languages. In terms of the chronology of the Philippine past, I mean, growing up in the Philippines, in the Philippine educational system, what I know more about the Philippine history, starting from the Spanish colonial period, from here, like 500 years ago up to present. It is as if our history started 500 years ago, but little is known what happened before that time. And this is very intriguing and interesting because we are talking about thousands of years of prehistory, from 50,000 years ago to 500 years ago. So from the first Negrito migrants to the second wave of migrations, which is quite still controversial. There's opposing theories trying to argue whether it came from the north or from the south. And then later on, maritime Southeast Asia, when there is increasing trade between different communities in Southeast Asia, as well as trade with China and India during this time for the past 2,000 years. Now I briefly present to you the predominant theories on Filipino origins. So scholars or experts would agree or would have a consensus that the first migrants were the Australasians, commonly referred to as Negritos, arrived around 50,000 years ago. But it is the second wave of migrations that is quite controversial. One group of scholars would argue that it's out of Taiwan, and this is mainly espoused by or promoted by Peter Bellwood. And it's mainly based on linguistic evidence and some archaeological data. And they would argue Taiwan as a source, and there's unitary movement of cultural package, which would include people moving together with the language, the Malaya-Polynesian languages, together with agriculture such as rice, and pottery such as red slip pottery. On the other side is out of Sunda, which is, or from the south, which is promoted by William Solheim and later on Stephen Oppenheimer, and would also point to, especially with Stephen Oppenheimer, pointing to climate change would play a role. And because of this climate change, there's inundation of Sunda land, resulting to movement of populations into different directions happening around 10,000 years ago. So this would argue mainland Southeast Asia as the source of human populations. And this is a study published in Science way back before in 2009 from Max Planck by Russell Gray and Simon Greenhill. And it is a Bayesian phylogenetic analysis of the Austronesian languages, arguing it came from Taiwan to the Philippines and so on and so forth, with the Austronesian expansion to Easter Island and way back, way into the to the east and to the west to Madagascar as well, close to us in Africa. But if you look at it in details, even the classification of languages in the Philippines, actually, I chatted with the authors of this paper, it's actually south to north. It's like Barito languages, Sangil languages, and then the rest of Philippine languages. So it's still questionable in terms of the interpretation of this data. And the other side of the coin is out of Sunda. This is a reconstruction of the Sunda continent or landmass by Kurt Lambeck, our collaborator from the Australian National University. He's a geologist, and way back in 21,000 years ago. So the islands are interconnected, Borneo, Java, Sumatra, and starting 15,000 years ago, it starts to become inundated, resulting to what we know as the present day, which is similar to around 6,000 years ago, separation of different islands. And before, the Palawan landmass and Sulu archipelago is almost connected to Borneo. And the argument is that because of this inundation of landmass resulted to the movements of population and differentiation of population, causing population drift or genetic drift, and thus migration of populations into the different directions. So it's out of Taiwan versus out of Sundaland. So what can we do to try to uncover the story of our past? There are different approaches. These summary from Human Evolutionary Genetics textbook published in 2015. And one is through history. We can use written records, but I mean, written records started around 5,000 years ago. You can also do look at oral history and talk to indigenous historians, but that can maybe go as far back as 1,000 years ago. And it's not, it always changes every now and then. It can be modified, even if you play a game called Pass the Message at the very same time, from one person to the other. Everybody is, I think everybody's aware that the message would modify at the very last person, and that's on the same day. And now we're talking about hundreds of years or even 1,000 years of history. So it can be modified. In terms of languages, it can be up to 10,000 years ago. And you can also go so on and so forth with different fields. But what we're focusing on is looking at DNA, the genetics of individuals and populations. And you can trace really way back further in time. So what we do, we look at the biomolecules, the DNA, and it's composed of 4 letters, AGTC, and it's a double helix structure, and it's compacted into chromosomes and distributed into 22 chromosomes. And then we look at certain sites in the genome to investigate the human past. And so it's like this, different letters. So it's like when I explain to cultural communities, I explain it's like a plate number of your motorcycle or your car. It's really specific to you. You have this, but it's plate letters. It's composed of 3 billion base pairs. It's very specific. And one copy is from one parent and another from another parent. So you have 1/2 of your ancestry is coming from your father and another half from your mother. And you can divide it 1/4 from your grandparents. And then you can go further back in time, so on and so forth. So there are snippets of information that can represent thousands of individuals in the past. So even a single individual can tell us a story of his or her ancestors or population of ancestors. So imagine if you have 10 individuals in a certain population, it can really represent quite a lot in the past. So you need to compare these individuals within a population and within different populations to understand demographic history, if there's a mixture or gene flow between different populations or migration between different populations, and how farther back in time did they diverge or split. So what we did is to look at SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphism, or sites that are known to be different or variable or variant between different populations or individuals. And this is based on 2.5 million SNPs. And we have a target of 10 individuals per population. And yes, as I mentioned, the information of a single individual can represent thousands of individuals in the ancient past. And in some study, like the one published in Current Biology and in Nature, we also sequence. So we look at the entire 3 billion letters, not only the 2.5 million SNPs, but the major study in PNAS was looking at SNPs. And this was made possible only with the collaboration with a lot of regional partners, regional universities, as well as museums and non-governmental organizations, and most especially with the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, under the leadership of Felipe Mendoza de Leon, who provided us the legal cover in accordance with their mandate under the NCCA law and Heritage Act. And they made sure that everything's in accordance with ethical guidelines, so they're always with us in all throughout our field work, and that we abide by their internal policies in seeking consent from cultural communities. They have quite a huge network of cultural workers all throughout the Philippines. And for this work, the participants are at least 18 years old, and they represent an identified and distinct ethno-linguistic group of the Philippines. If they identify as, for instance, as Cebuano, they have to, based on their memory, that all of their grandparents are pure Cebuano or other mixed with other indigenous populations. And we document this with an informed consent from each individual, and whenever necessary, we also document with consent from the community council or council of elders. And the consent process is in the presence of collaborative partners, especially representatives from the NCCA under the Committee of Cultural Education. And it's quite a task going around the Philippines. It's also quite fun. And there are times that you have to go through overloaded motorcycles or jeepneys or ride a truck to visit remote areas without a road, using the side of the river as a road, or riding a very small boat to travel like hours and hours to visit within islands. This is a travel between Cuyo and Agutay Island. It's quite challenging. And yeah, and there's also moments, I've been able to visit Camp Darapanan and MALF. So during that time, a rebel camp, but now, and there was a peace process now, so it's not an issue anymore. And every time I visit in some areas, I regularly experience acute gastroenteritis. It's good that I have some medical doctor colleagues and me myself, so I was able to treat myself during that time. And we had a presentation of the results of the study at the Mindanao State University in Marawi. And a day after that, the siege of Marawi started. So we left Marawi, and then the day after, war started. So there are some security issues as well when traveling around. And we continued traveling around, presenting the results of the study at different groups during the height of martial law in Mindanao. And what's really important for us is to do community consultation and interact with indigenous communities. So this is in South Cotabato. This is Carlo Ebello of NCCA, and I'm trying to explain the results of the study. And this is in Negros Island with Ismael Java and Edison Molanida of NCCA, and this is among the Sang Areté group in Glan, and with the representatives of 7 indigenous groups of Bukidnon in Malay-Balay. And all throughout this field experience, we also get to experience like different rituals and animal sacrifices, as well as a very nice chants from indigenous communities. And there was a time when we visited the Pawlik community. One of the chanters summarized the results of the study in a chant, which was beautifully explained, and someone is translating it to me. So the ethnic groups that were included in the study, we covered around 115 in one publication or 118 in another publication, indigenous cultural communities, which include the Negritos, which are considered as the first inhabitants, where some of them still practice hunting and gathering. There are around 25 groups in our list, and Cordillerans, which include the Tuwali, Kalanguya, Kangkanay, Balangao, those who are living in the Cordillera administrative region, as well as Ibaloy in Benguet region, and Mangyans of Mindoro, which includes Buhid, Bangon, Iraya, and Hanuno, and Manobos of Mindanao, which covered around 22 groups in our list, including a Manobo-speaking group, Kinamigin and Camiguin, and even as far as Cagayancillo, Cagayanen, which is an island between, based in Cagayancillo, an island between Palawan and Negros Island. And Sama groups, which include Sama Dilaut, or ocean Sama, or boat dwellers. This is commonly known as Badjao, but they prefer to be called Sama Dilaut or Dilaut. And Sama Bihing or Sama Lipid, those who are living in the shoreline, include Sama Kabingaan and Bangigi, and Sama Dea or land-based Sama. The Sama were based in Bungao, Tawi-Tawi. And for the findings of the study, this, as I mentioned earlier, this is mainly based on the publication last year in PNAS, and then some findings in Nature as well as in Current Biology. So I summarize into 12 important highlights. One is modern humans, especially Homo sapiens, are rooted in Africa. So we are all rooted in Africa. All of us here in this webinar listening, we are rooted in Africa, the birthplace of modern human evolution. The oldest fossils of anatomically modern humans, those who looks like us, are found in Africa. And the highest levels of genetic diversity also found in Africa. And the deepest divergence of population split between two groups of populations is found in Africa. It can range up to 300,000 years ago between Khoisan-speaking groups and the rest of sub-Saharan Africans. So from Africa, around 60,000 years ago, a subset population came out. And yeah, some groups went into Europe into different stages or phases, contributing to the three ancestral sources of Europeans today, such as the hunter-gatherer ancestry, farmer-related Anatolian ancestry, and steppe ancestry from Yamnaya. And then some went up north into Siberia, the ancestral North Eurasian, which mixed with something East Asian, which contributed to the basal population of all Native Americans. And then some went north of the Himalayan arc, contributing to the ancestry of East Asians, and some went to the south of Himalayan arc, contributing to what we label as a term, or some would coin as Australasians, an ancestry, genetic ancestry that's shared by Negrito groups in Southeast Asia, as well as indigenous Australians and Papuan or Papuan-related groups, like this one. And then coming out of Africa, something happened. Modern humans encountered a distinct species of archaic humans known as the Neanderthals. And this was established based on the Nobel Prize-winning finding by Svante Pääbo with the sequencing of the Neanderthal genome. And it can be really shown that we, all of us outside of Africa, perhaps I think all of us listening in this webinar, has some Neanderthal ancestry, around 1 to 3% Neanderthal ancestry. And this is based also on the analysis of all ethnic groups around the Philippines. We have some Neanderthal ancestry. So this is the split of different populations in Africa. So this is Khoisan, Southern Africa. And yes, and then another group of hunter-gatherer African, Central African, and then a subset of East African went out of Africa around 60 to 70,000 years ago. And there's an encounter with Neanderthal. So all populations outside of Africa have some Neanderthal ancestry. And this is a very important concept that we have to understand, that even the dark-colored skin Negritos and Papuans are more genetically related or similar to the white, blonde Swedes than they are to any African population. Because yeah, all Australasians cluster together with Europeans and East Asians compared to Africans, because we are just a subset of East African population genetically. So you can really not rely on physical appearance or phenotype in terms of grouping populations. It's very different when you look at the genetic material. But what's important in this slide is that, yeah, coming out of Africa, there's encounter with Neanderthals, hence there is some Neanderthal ancestry in most populations. There's also migration, some populations into Africa, like ancestors of Eurasian ancestors, which gave some Neanderthal ancestry to some African populations, but this was later on. And then the next point is that Negritos are the first modern human inhabitants of the Philippine Islands. So this is the basal Australasian, the basal population migrating south of the Himalayan arc. Some went into Andaman Islands to become the Andaman Island Negritos. Some went to Malaysia or southern Thailand to become the Malay Negritos, or the Mani of Thailand. And there's this what we call as basal Sunda population that's split into different groups. Some going into the Sahul to become the ancestor of Papuans and indigenous Australians. And some populations, two clusters, one going to the north to become the ancestors of northern Negritos, and in the south, southern Negritos. These are examples of Andaman Island Negritos from, which include Onge and Jarawa. And these are some examples of Malay Negritos, which include Jehay, Batek, Kintak, Nendri. And there's also a Negrito group in southern Thailand called the Mani Negritos. So it's not only in the Philippines that we can find Negrito groups. And these are different Negrito groups from the Philippines, which include Alta, Arta, Agta, Aita, Dumagat, Remontado, and Manidi, and Luzon, Bataca, Palawan, Ati, Anata, Negros, and Panay Island, as well as Mamanwa in Mindanao. Some examples of Papuans and indigenous Australians, and from Solomon Islands, non-Papuan Melanesians. They are known for their blonde hair, and it has been genetically shown that they indeed have a mutation which resulted to blonde hair. It's not because of exposure to the sun or being in the sea. So this is another instance in human evolution that, aside from Europeans having blonde hair, there's also some populations in Oceania that has blonde hair. And I have to emphasize that Philippine Negrito ethnic groups cluster with Asia-Pacific populations. So this is a principal component analysis looking at the variance of the different populations in terms of genetic ancestry. So each dot is an individual. When two dots are closer to each other, meaning you're genetically related, you're farther from each other, you're more genetically distant. So this is the cluster of Africans, Europeans, and these are East Asians from here. And this is Malagasy population, which would make sense because they're a mixture of something related to African and Austronesian related ancestry or Cordilleran related ancestry. So these are the East Asians. The one that's most at the extreme pole are the Cordillerans, pointing to that they are the least admixed East Asians. It's the only group that we find. We don't find any Negrito ancestry among our groups that we have studied. And these are the Philippine Negritos, and these are the Australo-Papuans. So Australo-Papuans and Philippine Negritos clusters with the Asia-Pacific populations. So they are not Africans. Genetically, they're very Asia-Pacific. And this is, again, the same analysis, but only restricted to Philippine ethnic groups. These are the Philippine Negritos, which form their own cluster. The least admixed would be coming from here, the Aita of Central Luzon. And these are the Cordillerans, the polar opposite of Philippine Negritos. And these are the Mangyans of Mindoro. And there's one group of Mangyan called Mangyan Iraya. So they have some phenotypic characteristics that can be related to Negritos. Indeed, genetically, there's like attraction towards Negritos, the Mangyan Iraya. And these are the Manobo speaking groups, and these are the Sama-related groups. The one more distinct are the ones living at the Sea of Sama de Laot, or in boats, or in stilt houses, some of them. And this is a family tree looking at different ethnic groups, looking or indigenous groups in the Philippines. So based on neighbor joining tree of genetic relationships, we'd really find a distinct cluster of Negritos, and the rest are non-Negritos. So yeah, Negritos would really form a distinct cluster, with really pointing out that they're genetically distinct, except for some, like the Ati of Panay and Negros and Agta of Sorsogon. They are heavily admixed with something related to East Asian. So that's why they would cluster more to the other side. But most Negritos would form a distinct cluster. And not only that, Philippine Negritos have a deep structure. So there's a deep split between different Negrito groups, including Southern Negrito, Mamanwa, and different Aita, Arta, and Agta groups, splitting roughly between 20 to 30,000 years ago. But yeah, we still have to refine these estimates when we have full genome, comprehensive analysis of the full genome sequences. But yeah, what we can infer during this time, there's really a deep population structure between the Negrito groups. So there's a deep history among Negrito groups within the Philippines. And the fourth important aspect, finding that we have is that there is high Denisovan ancestry among Negrito groups. So there's another extinct human lineage called Denisovans who are phylogenetically related to Neanderthals, but they're very distinct. And yes, so this is levels of Australasian or Negrito ancestry. So these are the different Aita groups. And this is the levels of Denisovan ancestry. There's quite a correlation. Once, if you have higher Negrito ancestry, you have higher Denisovan ancestry. So there's a strong correlation between Negrito and Denisovan ancestry. And not only that, we find the highest Denisovan ancestry in the world among Aita Magbukon. Before this study, what is known is that the highest Denisovan ancestry is among Papuans. So this is Denisovan ancestry. And yes, and despite the fact that Aita Magbukon or different groups, the Negrito groups are admixed with something, with the more recent migrants, the Cordilleran related or Austronesian related populations. So if you have a hypothetical, if you plot a line towards an unadmixed or pure Negrito population, this can be maybe recovered in an ancient DNA, perhaps 2,000 years old or older. We really have a very much higher Denisovan ancestry in this hypothetical unadmixed Negrito population. And based on this, we did a lot of modeling and tried to understand how would this be, how would this happen? And based on our models, this would only can happen if there's an independent Denisovan introgression into Philippine Negritos. Either there are Denisovans within the Philippines or Denisovans in different islands all throughout Southeast Asia. So when the ancestral Philippine Negritos arrived, they admixed with this archaic population, hence resulting into high levels of Denisovan ancestry among Negritos. And we also expanded this one with a collaboration with Institute Pasteur with Jeremy Schwan and led by Luis Quintana Morchi. And this is a phylogeny of the Denisovan populations, diverging really further back in time between 200 to 400,000 years ago. And then these are the Neanderthals admixing into the different population in Southeast Asia, including Papuans and Philippine Negritos, even some in East Asia, what we term as Siberian Denisovan or Northern Denisovan. So we still have to understand what's going on in the Philippines, and that will be uncovered once we have full genome sequences. But there is complexity in terms of archaic ancestry in island Southeast Asia. So there's more interest in trying to uncover this one. So what we do is look at the present-day genome and identify which tracks are old, and then extract that, and then combine that with different individuals and reconstruct computationally a Denisovan genome based on the genomes of present-day individuals. This is the only thing that we can do if we don't have ancient DNA from a Denisovan living in Southeast Asia. But at least it would add idea or information into the field. So despite the fact the populations with the highest Denisovan ancestry are found in island Southeast Asia and Oceania, no Denisovan fossils have yet been discovered in the area. It might be because it's not yet been discovered, or maybe a lack of information on the characteristics of what Denisovan looks like. So we really do not know what a Denisovan looks like. How does a Denisovan looks like? It's really based on DNA, and most of the available knowledge is based on the Altai-Denisovans of Siberia. And this led to the proposition that the previously discovered archaic hominins in the region, including Penghu individuals in between Taiwan and China, even Shujiao individual, even the Homo luzonensis might be genetically related or might be Denisovan themselves, but we still do not know. I mean, we need to have DNA to actually uncover this one. And then after that, so out of Africa, and then Neanderthal, and then Philippine Negritos encountering Denisovans. Then later on, fast forward in time, around after 15,000 years ago, what we uncover is there's a distinct genetic ancestry in southern Philippines, especially Mindanao. We label this as Mindanao-related to Manobo-related ancestry, and it's likely related to the post-glacial movement of Manobo-related groups, and their ancestors diverge older than the divergence between like Taiwanese and Cordillerans, or Taiwanese and some East Asian ancestry of Han populations. So they're back in time. And later on, when they entered, they encountered Negritos, so they have Negrito ancestry, especially in southern Negritos, and later on, the Cordilleran-related ancestry. And after that, there's these Sama-related groups, which is an ancestry that's very distinct, especially in southwestern Philippines, including some Palawanic groups, and especially the Sama or Bajo-related groups. And this genetic ancestry is very much distinct compared to that of Manobo ancestry. So this is a genetic analysis, whether you have Sama-related ancestry or Manobo-related ancestry, you can really see the distinction between Eastern and Western Mindanao. And you can also analyze Manobo-related ancestry or Mindanao-related ancestry versus Malabri, which is an Austro-Asiatic speaking group, a very different language from Austronesian, found in mainland Southeast Asia. So these are the Austro-Asiatic speaking populations. So there's a mainland Southeast Asia connection for Sama-related ancestry. Very clear connection. And it's also diverged way back further in time. And later on, it received some Negrito-related ancestry, and later on, some Cordilleran-related ancestry, especially those who are living in inland. So both Sama and Manobo-related ancestries entered the Philippines between 8 to 12,000 years ago. So it's likely around the time when there's like changes in the geography of the region. So there's possible role of climate change for this dispersal of populations. And the one with the lasting impact is the expansion of Cordilleran-related groups, or maybe related to the expansion of Polynesian-speaking populations. This ancestry is found all throughout the archipelago. And based on our estimates, these are from different methods and from 2 different studies. And Cordilleras diverged from indigenous Taiwanese at least 7,000 years ago. So this is really older, but what's argued from out of Taiwan, which happened around 5,000 years ago, according to that theory. And yeah, it brings to the question about the concept or theory of out of Taiwan, that people move together with language and farming and the full cultural package. And what we argue as well is that during this time, there's also there's a landmass between Taiwan and southern part of East Asia, and this was inundated because of climate change and might also cause to dispersals of populations into different directions and happening in pulses. That's why we see like the movement of population to the Philippines is also in pulses. So one population is not nested to another population. It appears to be in pulses. But we still have to establish that once we have full genome sequences. And a recent study by Orneb Alam or under Michael Puruganan from New York University, which studied on the phylogenetics of rice. So the rice from in the Philippines, especially in Cordillera, is coming from Indonesia, not from Taiwan. In fact, the rice that's found in Taiwan is a combination of temperate variety and something that's coming from the Philippines. So it's the opposite direction. And this is like happening like around after 3,500 years ago or around 2,000 years ago, happening in the Philippines. So the introduction of rice is much more recent as opposed to the theory of out of Taiwan, arguing for the movement of rice together with the people around 5,000 years ago. And then other recent findings that were established recently was that the Polynesians and other Pacific islanders, such as the Chamorros of Guam, are genetically linked to Filipinos or indigenous Filipinos. And these are the publications by Pontus Hublon, one of our colleagues, and as well as Lipson from the Harvard group. And this is a publication from Pugak with Mark Stoneking, arguing that some of the Chamorros is genetically linked to Philippine populations. So there's a lasting genetic legacy of indigenous Filipinos to the genetic makeup of Pacific islanders. And another interesting thing that we find is that later on, we also detect this Papuan-related ancestry. This is detected among Eastern Indonesians, but also among populations in Southeastern Philippines. We also find it a bit all throughout the Visayan region, but extremely more strong among Southeastern Philippines, like the Bili-related groups, the Blaan, Tiboli, and strongest among the Sangil ethnic group. It's either that, there's a migration or movement of Papuan-related groups to Eastern Indonesia, then to the Philippines, or directly from Papua into, or Oceania into Southeastern Philippines. And we're still estimating the time. It should be between 3,000 to 25,000 years ago, based on our estimates. But we still have to figure that out once we have full genome sequences. But definitely, we find Papuan-related genetic signal in Southeastern Philippines. This is a new finding. And and there's like a very good review by Alfred Pawlik and Philip Piper in terms of the exchanges, maritime exchanges between based on artifacts, for instance, obsidian and obsidian and shell adds similarities between Neo-Oceania as well as some archaeological sites in the Philippines. So this is a very good review to look at. And then there's a cultural and genetic legacy of maritime trading network in India. So what we find as well, there is this India-related or South Asian genetic signal found only in Sama-related groups. So there's this South Asian genetic ancestry among Sama. So this is very distinct, and we can measure it and date it. It happened around 1,000 to 500 years ago, which is around the time of Srivijaya and Majapahit empires. And interestingly, in terms of genetic impact, it's very limited to Sama-related groups. But in terms of cultural impact, the cultural legacy of maritime trading network is more widespread, such as the Sanskrit-based words Agham, Bansa, Bathala, Guro, or Indian honorifics like Raha, Maharlika. You can find it all throughout the Philippines, or local adaptation of Indian folk literature, such as Meron epic Maharaja Lawana and use of index-based scripts like baybayin, basahan, badlit, kulitan, like this. And then another point of contention when I'm traveling around, especially in Islamized areas, whether they came in as a unit. But what we find is that there's an absence of Arab-related genetic signal among Islamized groups, and they do not form a single genetic unit, meaning Islamization is only happen only via cultural division. There's already indigenous culture before, and then Islamization only happened by diffusion. These are the different Islamized ethnic groups, and they don't form a genetic unit. They are very different from each other. So that's one proof that Islamization spread only via diffusion. For instance, Merno culture already exists prior to arrival of Islam. It's a combination of different influences. They speak a Malayo-Polynesian branch of Austronesian language, and they have ochre motifs that's related to Sama Okil-Ukil, and they have a localized version Indian epics, and they have indigenous beliefs chronicled in Darangan. So it's a combination of different cultures, and then it became Islamized later on, around 500 years ago. And lastly, there's a very limited genetic legacy of the Spanish colonial period. In a span of time, like for 333 years, we were colonized by the Spaniards, and we only find among all individuals that we have studied, only 1% of the examined individuals have some Spanish ancestry. So this is 1 out of 100, and we dated it, and it's between 150 to 450 years ago, which coincides with the Spanish colonial period. So the impact of Spanish colonization, just like Islamization, is largely cultural in terms of religion, the names, and the name of the country itself, the cuisine, the music, the dance, the celebration of fiestas. It's like largely cultural. In terms of genetic contribution or impact, is very limited, around 1% of examined individuals. So in summary, we have 5 major waves of human migration into the Philippines. First, the northern and southern Negritos as the first modern human migrants, happening around 50,000 years ago. Then later on, after 15,000 years ago, Manobo and Sama-related populations in the Philippines via the southern route, maybe likely due to the climate change impact of inundation of Sundaland, and then this huge movement, likely via pulses of Cordilleran-related populations, likely bringing with them the languages, Malayo-Polynesian languages. And this happened prior to the arrival of cereal agriculture or rice agriculture. And what we also find is that there is a Denisovan ancestry which is high among Negritos. And in fact, a Negrito group has the highest Denisovan ancestry. And then there's minor Papuan, interestingly, related gene flow and South Asian gene flow. And what we also find is the ancestors of Polynesians and other Pacific Islanders are likely linked or came from the Philippines. And the spread of Islam and Christianity is only via cultural diffusion. It's very limited impact in terms of genetic legacy. And the genetic legacy of Spanish colonial period is very limited as well. With this, you can also view the summary of my presentation in this laymanized explanation, 12 important insights into the genetic regions and diversity of the Filipino people. You can download it from larenalab.com. And I would like to acknowledge the NCCA, National Commission for Culture and the Arts, and all of the very dedicated and passionate partners from the indigenous cultural communities, and my colleagues from the Matthias Jakobson group when they're doing this study. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Max, for this most wonderful and exciting presentation. It's really amazing, and as a relatively recent migrant myself, I find this fascinating, this diversity of ethnic groups and the deep population history of the Negrito groups that you presented, and they are still here. While from an archaeological point of view, we usually deal with a rather dead material culture, and so it gave me a lot of joy to see that this goes really well along with the recent archaeological research that happened in the Philippines and in the entire region of island Southeast Asia. That would also suggest kind of dynamic maritime interactions in different directions, which goes back to way before 30,000 years, and perhaps just it was like that instead of only a few migration waves. And the more interestingly, since the major islands of this vast region, like Sulawesi or most of the Philippines, were never connected to a mainland, and sea crossings have always been necessary. Mm-hmm. So with earliest secure radiocarbon dates, uranium dates dating a bit earlier, in Sulawesi, we can assume a human arrival there at 43,000 years at least. So this is quite interesting, and it was really great to hear that from you in this comprehensive and precise presentation. May I also recognize the presence of our friends, John Peterson from USC, Marian Reyes from the National Museum, and our forensic anthropologist, Dr. Tanya Uldin from Ateneo de Manila. Hello, and thank you for joining us. Ido, do we have questions from the audience?
None so far. No questions yet. Oh, we have someone raising his hand. Daniel, if you could unmute yourself.
While Daniel is deciding or trying to figure out how to unmute himself, may I ask a question, Alfred? Dr. Larena, how long did it take you to do the study to obtain all this?
So yeah, so it's published last year. So it's 6-7 years until from consulting with committees with different partners all throughout the Philippines, and then sampling, and then returning the results, and then writing the publication.
A long time.
Yeah.
And a lot of distance traveled. What is your sample population size?
What's that?
What is the population size, the sample size?
Okay, the sample size, and based on the PNAS studies, around 10 per indigenous for ethno-linguistic group, around 10.
So 1,000 over, what's that?
Yes, more than 1,000 was 1,100 for the PNAS study was covered, which would represent all, more than 100 ethnic groups.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, welcome. And we made sure of that because so that if there's a comprehensive coverage, so that we don't have loopholes or areas that are important in terms of movements of populations. Yeah.
Amazing.
Max, may I?
Yes.
May I ask? We are so used to obtaining samples for radiometric dating. So I'm very curious, and maybe that's also interesting for the audience. How do you estimate the timelines of genetic admixture or migrations?
I see. Yeah. So there are different methods. It's really computational. So if you compare like two individuals, like there's a coalescent. At one point in time, it would coalesce to have a most recent common ancestor, and there's like a standard mutation rate, and you can have this is a mathematical formula and different approaches, and you have to validate that. And so just comparing sequences between different population or individuals, you can estimate until they coalesce and you have a standard estimate of divergence time. And what's good right now is that we have like ancient DNA from different individuals or populations, so you can even calibrate it. Like if you have a particular ancient DNA material dated 7,000, 10,000, or 40,000 years old, the oldest in East Asia is a Tianyuan individual, which is 40,000 years. So that will be a good calibration point. And so far, it's still consistent in terms of divergence of different populations.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. Unfortunately, we ancient human remains are unfortunately a bit rare, especially mid-Holocene and earlier. And then we had one, for example, we had one burial in one of our sites in Mindoro. And in Bubok 1. Yeah, and it was relatively young with around 5,000 years. So
but that's still very important.
Yeah, but we failed to retrieve DNA. So it was Johannes Krause and his colleagues who tried all kinds of methods. And in the end, it was both Max Planck Institutes in Jena and in Leipzig working together. And still they couldn't extract DNA that was useful, which was a shame because it was, I think, the oldest formal burial that's pre-Austronesian and not on Palawan.
Yeah, exactly. What's your suspicion? Is it Negrito or, I mean, it's difficult to assess.
Yeah, it's difficult. And the fragments are not in the best condition. Tanya has seen it probably a bit better than me. Maybe she can say a few words.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's very brittle material, and let's say the work on it of the previous anthropologists was maybe also not that adequate for this material. So unfortunately, we cannot have it for further work. But while I'm talking, I'm also curious. First of all, thank you very much for presenting your excellent work, and I hope we can collaborate in future.
Okay.
And on the other hand, I would like to know your opinion on these species definition within human evolution.
I see. Yeah.
How do you see? Because now you have a very broad overview and also a broad database for maybe talking about this.
Yeah. So in terms of species classification, how do we identify one group as a unique, distinct species is quite, it's not relevant to genetics or population genetics, really. So, and yes, and I think paleoanthropologists are limited to what the information that they have. It's really different once you have DNA, and so in terms of like the Homo lucenensis, when I look at a study, it's a combination of derived and archaic characteristics. It might be an admixture between modern human and archaic human, or a Denisovan, or admixture between both. So it's difficult to assess, not until you have DNA. I think when they found the Denisovan bone, they don't know it's a very distinct. It might have been another Neanderthal, or they never knew until they have the DNA. So it's difficult to assess just based on the phenotype. I mean, even as I emphasized, like Australasians, Filipino Negritos, Papuans, and indigenous Australians are more genetically related to a Swede, a European, compared to the African. So that's one particular example. Yeah, I hope I did answer your question.
I just wanted to also point out that it's quite a relief to have these genetical investigations in terms of anti-racism.
I see. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks. And once the paper was out about Bubuk 1 from the rock shelter, I was so interested. Hopefully there will be DNA coming out soon, but it's unfortunate that there's nothing.
Yeah. I was also hoping since we submitted that for sampling that something will come out. We have a suspicion because the way the burial was organized as a very tightly flexed burial with stone settings underneath and then on top, so deliberately choosing flat stones to cover it and also provide the base. Absence of grave goods and so. There is very little in island Southeast Asia, but the bulk of similar burials you find on the mainland, and there they are slightly older. So we were thinking, well, this could be an indicator that this kind of burial tradition and the thought, the spiritual thought would come from the mainland and find its way to Mindoro.
Okay, I see.
While for the shell adzes, it appears just the other way around. We had from the same site, but actually from all our three major sites, also Bubok 2, where we had the oldest preform of an adze that we directly dated to around 9,000 years, calibrated BP. A massive tool. It was never finished into an adze blade, but they used it eventually as kind of a chopper, so really for heavy duty activities. Okay. And if you look at the distribution of shell adzes, mostly made of this giant clam of Tridacna gigas, they appear, or the earliest dates appear to come from Melanesia, from near Oceania, and then towards the Philippines, it becomes gradually younger, not by much. So we are talking about between maybe 11, 12,000 years for the eastern appearance, and then by 9,000, they're already in the Philippines. But it seems that it's a movement that goes from east to west. You always think of expansion from west, from the mainland into the island world, and eventually Australia. Which brings me to another question. If I may, I hope there are not too many other questions in the audience. Just one, I noticed you in one of your slides, you estimated the time of arrival in Australia between 47 and 50,000 years ago, roughly. Which I do not disagree, of course. I think that's very sound. But then there's still this one site, Areté, that is dated to 65,000 even, or 60 and more. And but of course, the site itself has been also controversially discussed, and the age of the site. And I think the debate is probably still ongoing. Would you think that the 60,000 date might be a bit too old for Australia? Also because the radiocarbon record for the entire Wallaceian region doesn't really go beyond 50,000.
I see, yeah. I mean, there's always something surprising every year in population genetics, so you cannot totally exclude it out. And one possibility, I mean, the estimate of the divergence date between indigenous with that one is based on present day population. It's also possible that the one in Majabebe, right? It's a different population that we cannot be reflected in the estimate of the divergence times now. But it can be not true as well. But yeah, it's possible. But we're an isolate, but maybe there's a need more to discover in different sites all throughout the region. Definitely.
Yeah. It has become a hotspot in research in recent years, so that gives us a lot of hope.
For sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wilfredo Torres was raising his hand earlier, and thank you.
Sorry, Willie.
Unmute yourself, please.
Hi, sorry. Magandang hapon.
Hi.
Dr. Larena, salamat. Thank you for your presentation. It certainly takes me back to my own encounters with different groups, especially in Mindanao and Sabah, Malaysia. And my there's a slide there towards the end where you mentioned is why was it controversial? Do you think that there was no Arab? You did not find any Arab ancestry with a. When you presented this to the people in Mindanao, for instance, it was controversial for them, and why, or why was it controversial?
Yeah. So it's not super controversial, but there's a claim that if you have a royal blood among the Meranao, so you have Arab blood. That's the claim. And yes, but when I was presenting in Mindanao State University, like all key people were there, and I really couldn't find it. This is based on genetic evidence. And then some among them, they discuss among each other, and they also emphasized that Maranao culture was already there before Islamization. It's just like the history was Islamized because of the current predominant Islamic religion. But based on facts, it's not really there. So that's the only sort of controversy. But at least it was a very good exchange of ideas and discussion, and it's also coming from them explaining what's really there and what they know about it. It's just that I think I provided the more or less the hard evidence.
And did they accept the evidence?
Yeah, it's not an issue. There's always a traveling around. There's always a tendency for some groups that we were the first one who arrived here, and the other ones are just a sub of us. But I have to point out that it's just you have a common ancestor. We don't know who they are, but you shared ancestry with the other group. It's not that you are the first one. You are a descendant of a common ancestor. And you have to emphasize that one. So there's always the concept of precedence, or we're the first one, or having special ancestry.
There are questions in the chat box, sorry. And before Ado reads them, may I finally ask this question so we can, as you said earlier, put it to rest. How did you address the ethics issue that was being brought up against your research, and how did you put this to rest finally?
I see. So we were subjected to investigations because there were complaints from certain personalities or groups in the Philippines to Uppsala University, and it went through serious investigations from the ethics committee in Uppsala, the board reviewing on misconduct, and even up to the central ethics committee. It was also reviewed by Nature Journal because we have a publication with Institute Pasteur. And they also consulted an independent bioethicist specializing in the region, as you have mentioned, also in PNAS. So so we presented all the documents that we have. And it's not only us defending, actually, it's also people from the Philippines, legal experts, and people from NCCA, and indigenous representatives defending us. So it's mostly coming from our collaborators and colleagues who defended us and pointing out that this was done in accordance with the ethical standards. And based on the review by different independent experts, they agreed with our assessment. That's basically. I hope I address, or you have further questions.
Thank you for finally addressing that, and it's very interesting that it was your collaborators who were defending you on this issue. So Ado, maybe there are some questions in the chat box.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am Mylene. Also, thank you, Dr. Willie Torres. It's worth noting that one of our faculty in the DSV. So, okay, I'll just read the question from Abby Kitma. She asks, or he asks, perhaps it is beyond the parameters of your study or of the study. But do you see any implications to current policies, projects, or programs, open parenthesis, cultural heritage, indigenous peoples, or other, close parenthesis, arising from the major findings? Are there immediate changes or actions that have to be taken? What importance do the consulted communities attribute to the results of the study?
I see. Yes, that's a very relevant and good question, I think. And in the program where I belong, I mean, there's also like colleagues who are specializing in African demographic history, Native American demographic history, and we have engaged with different indigenous populations all throughout the world. And there's this shared interest of knowing our past, knowing more who we are, where we came from. It's a thing that we value very much, like any, I think, person or individual or population in the world. And knowing about that, empowers us. And and in some areas in the Philippines, when I traveled, they also wanted to invite me back so that it can be presented again when everybody is there, so that it can bring the message of unity and peace among different groups, especially those who are not going along together. That actually, despite our differences, we share the common origin. We are related to each other. And I think this kind of message is very important in terms of heritage, genetic heritage. And that's the thing that we always emphasize all throughout. And also true in like here in Europe, the concept of racism, we also have some sort of racism like in terms of social structure within the Philippines. And we have to emphasize that we also shared ancestry wherever you are now. What's the perception of a certain ethnic group in terms of social hierarchy? We still share. we come from a common origin. We share ancestry. Yeah, so that's the kind of message I think that should be emphasized in the curriculums.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Larena. And there's another question from someone named Admin. It's a bit of a broad question, so let me answer it. He or she's asking, what aspect of the study do you think needs more strengthening or improvement?
I see. Yes, I mean, it's looking at the entire sequence. Most of the major study in PNAS is looking at 2.5 million SNPs or sites that are known to be different from different populations or individuals. So looking at the full sequence would be nice, like looking at 3 billion sites. And that's being done by full genome sequencing. We have done some already, which is included in the current biology and nature publication, but doing a lot more. You will refine the divergence dates. And and of course, I mean, talking to Alfred, it's nice to have more ancient DNA from the Philippines. There's only one individual from Nagsabaran site, which was included in another major publication. So there's not, I think that's around 1,900 years or 2,000 years of age. So there's nothing older than that. If we have more archaeological material so that we can recalibrate and understand more our past, that would really be nice to have ancient DNA at different time points so that you have a temporal analysis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Larena.
And having a Denisovan individual identified, if it's possible.
Sorry,
Yes.
if nobody has a question right now. How do we have to imagine the Denisovan migration or admixture if we don't really have kind of physical or direct ancient DNA evidence in the Philippines or in island Southeast Asia? What are the let's say the easier to understand models or possibilities?
I'm not sure. So how did we identify there's likely a different Denisovan in the Philippines? Is that your question?
How did they reach the Philippines? How did they reach? And
I see. Yeah.
In what ways did they reach? Island Southeast Asia.
Yeah, hypothetically, because we don't find high Denisovan ancestry in other Negrito groups like Malay Negritos. It's almost nothing similar to other East Asians and even Andaman Island Negritos. So it's likely happening east of Wallace Line or within Sunda. You get what I mean? So they might have migrated via the Sunda when there's a land bridge way back before. And then later on, when the modern humans arrived, that's when they interbred. And so it's from south to north and from mainland Southeast Asia towards Sahul, if there's some Denisovans in Sahul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. how different would you see them actually from Neanderthals? Because from well, until the DNA analysis was done, they were considered just Neanderthals and an Eastern appearance of Neanderthals, and the material culture is also not that different.
Yeah. So yeah, we just term him Denisovan. I mean, it can be an Eastern Neanderthal. So we don't really, it's not an issue for us what's the term is, but it's a Denisovan species or a subclad of Neanderthal, or Neanderthal and Denisovan, a subclad of modern humans. It's also possible for us. But yeah, it's deeply diverging from Neanderthal. And so there's a reference Denisovan genome from Altai, Siberia, from Denisova cave. And what we find, the Denisovan ancestry among East Asians, which is very little, is 80% similar to the Denisovan, the reference Denisova. So it's like a more recent split. But when it comes to Denisovan ancestry in Papuans, like in Filipino Negritos, is 40 to 50% similar to the Denisovan. So it's more deeply diverging. So there's a phylogenetic tree. You can really remove the chunk from modern humans and compare it to the reference, but you have to merge all the chunks so that you can almost have a sort of Philippine Denisovan or Papuan Denisovan. But you have to sequence a lot so that you can reconstruct it. So it's 80%, 40%. And then within those 40%, you can compare between different populations. And that's what we're trying to do right now, because we need more sequences.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for clarifying that. And of course, I also hope that we will be in the very near future more lucky to find human remains that can be sampled successfully.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Do we have more questions, Ido?
We do have a few questions. One is from Marion. He's asking if you could tell us or walk us through the reaction of people from anthropology, linguistics, and archaeology to the study. How did they react to this?
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I work with archaeologists. I don't think I have any. I also work with Lawrence Reed in terms of linguistics. Yeah, we have a challenge of discussing because it's pretty much an out of Taiwan view, and but it's just that it's possible that language diffuse or the spread of languages happened earlier together with the people without the farming. Well, I think the thing that I can remember in terms of the reaction is that I met Peter Bellwood, and we had after the publication, and we had a discussion together with some of his colleagues, and we have an exchange. And I think he's quite open-minded, but still sticking to his view of out of Taiwan. But let's see how it goes. I think evidence will accumulate. I mean, we are driven by evidence, and as it's generated more and more, then we will be guided by the evidence. So far it's not super controversial. That's what I can say in terms of the experts in the field.
All right. I think Daniel, if you could unmute and read your question. Are you still here?
Yeah, I can read his. I can see his question. He's asking, is it fine?
Okay.
Yeah. This is Daniel here?
No, he's
okay. Yeah, so he was asking that they found a Papuan Denisovan DNA showed more than one lineage of Denisovans that's found in Papuan. Would it be possible that Negrito ancestry contains like more than one Denisovan population? It's certainly possible. So that's what we are trying to point out. That it's likely that there's a different Denisovan population within the Philippines interbreeding with ancestors of Negritos. If it's like more than one or two, we still don't know. We still need more sequences. So it's likely. That's what we can say as of now. But it's true that there are some colleagues of ours like Guy Jacobs and Mary Cox from New Zealand. Yeah, they established that there's two different Denisovan populations admixing with the ancestors of Papuans. So it's not surprising to find that among the ancestors of Filipino Negritos. So there's like archaic humans roaming around Southeast Asia and Wallacea, I suppose, and up the Seoul perhaps more than 50,000 years ago.
All right. And I guess finally, if I may read NJ's question, and if you don't mind, is there a particular reason why the study did not go through a local ethics review? Open parenthesis, at least one that a researcher doing studies involving human biological samples in the Philippines are expected to go through, close parenthesis, besides that it's deemed okay by the institutions outside the Philippines.
Yep. So we had a partnership with the National Commission of Culture and the Arts, and yes, and we are guided by their legal counsel, so the legal counsel that we consulted, and what's required within the Philippines, and yes, so we abided by that, and that's what we essentially did.
Yes, and NJ wants to add, if I may read to the audience, the involvement of the NCCA also stood out to me. I find it unusual that the NCCA would oversee a study involving human biological sample, as if the participants are nothing more than relics and artifacts. I just hope it wasn't the intention.
No, it's not that. But I mean, they're very passionate, and they're well intentioned. I think these are passionate individuals that I work with, and I mean, they're not only covering archaeology. I mean, they also cover anthropology. It's an overseeing agency that covers National Museum, including anthropology, and it's also an overarching agency on the Commission of Philippine Languages and Cultural Center of the Philippines. It's not only looking at relics and artifacts. And there's a lot of cultural workers affiliated with the NCCA who are really familiar or trusted by indigenous communities all throughout the Philippines. And as opposed to other agencies, I think, that's my personal experience.
Yeah, and if I may read some reactions on YouTube as well, Michelle Eusebius would say, any research done in and with the Philippines should be under the purview of ethics board. We have a PHREB here, and Sarah Bautista would say, but NCCA does not have an ethics committee. So those are just some reactions coming from the audiences in YouTube.
Yeah, I respect the reaction. So we abide by the instructions or the guidance provided by NCCA at the time, under the leadership of Felipe Larena and their legal counsels.
Maybe to end on a lighter note, Dr. Larena, do you have like any words to youngsters out there, young researchers out there who want to take in or do what you are doing? And
I see.
have any good words?
I see. Yeah. I think it's really seeking opportunities and being passionate and doing what you really like most and engaging with it, and that's the thing that I could really advise with them. And being open-minded, and a good scientist is always open to admit that you are wrong. So things change, and there's always something new to discover. So so being passionate at what you do and being open-minded and be open that you are wrong. And that's how science advances, I think, in the field that especially in our field, there's a lot of discoveries every year. So that's what I can say.
Thank you so much. I really learned a lot.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, so thank you again, Max. It was really wonderful, and thank you for being available for the many questions that came up. If there are no more questions, then I think we can come to an end for this webinar. Maybe just let me announce our next webinar, which will be held in 2 weeks on October 18. And our presenter will be Dr. Anne Margvelashvili from the Georgian National Museum, who will inform us about the latest and certainly very exciting fossil traces of the first hominins out of Africa. And stay tuned. We will post the lecture details and the registration link, as always, on the Ateneo website and our social media channels. Mylene?
Thank you very much, Alfred. Thank you very much, Dr. Larena. It was a pleasure listening to you this afternoon and meeting you, hopefully next time in person when you do decide. We look forward to that time. And thank you so much, everyone, to everyone who's here with us this afternoon. Tanya, John, Dr. Torres, Rick, of course, Ado. Thank you very much for joining us. And we'll see you in 2 weeks with Annie Marvella Vili from the Georgian National Museum.